If you've ever wondered if Buffalo Bill, the serial killer in the movie Silence of the Lambs, was based on an actual person, an actual killer, the answer is yes, unfortunately. Today we take a look into the true crime case of Gary Heidnik. 6 African-American women were kidnapped, tortured, and raped by a serial killer and possible cannibal, held captive in a basement pit at a Philadelphia, Pennsylvania home. Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you for joining today. And I haven't mentioned this in a while, but occasionally someone will email and ask, how do I help 10-Minute Murder? I like what you're doing and I want you to keep doing it, so what do I do to help out? And my normal response is, keep listening. When I release new episodes, listen to them. That helps. And I know that sounds pretty simple, but you listening does actually help. But there is another way you can help. I mean, if you really want to. Think about the last time you heard about a cool new TV show, a show that you should be watching. Or maybe you heard about a delicious recipe you should try. Somebody told you about it. One moment you didn't know about hash brown casserole with diced ham, and then somebody told you, and now you know. So that's how you can help. Tell everyone you know that you think may be interested that hash brown casserole with diced ham is delicious. Also let them know that 10-Minute Murder exists and that you like it. And that's it. Tell people about the thing that we're doing here. Before we get going with the story today, this is your official reminder to subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts and connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media. Links are in the show notes of this episode, as well as at 10minutemurder.com. Now to the story. Michael and Ellen Heidnik welcomed Gary into the world on November 22nd, 1943 in Eastlake, Ohio, a Cleveland suburb. Terry was his younger brother. The Heidnik children were raised by their mother for 4 years following their parents' 1946 divorce before being given to their father and his new wife. Gary would later contend that his father had verbally abused him. He claimed that his father would humiliate him by making him hang his stained sheets from his bedroom window in full view of the neighbors because he had a long-standing problem with bedwetting. But Gary's father said that this never happened. Gary avoided eye contact and social interaction with other students at school altogether. He raged at a new female student who asked him, "Did you do your homework, Gary?" and informed her she was not good enough to talk to him. Also, Heidnik was made fun of for having an abnormally shaped head, which he and Terry believe were caused by young Gary falling out of a tree. Nevertheless, wonky-head Gary excelled in the classroom and had an IQ of 148. With his father's support, Heidnik, then 14, entered for 2 years at the Staunton Military Academy in Virginia, but he left before finishing. At the age of 17, he left public high school and enlisted in the Army. After his mother overdosed on alcohol and pills and committed suicide in 1970, Heidnik attempted his first of several suicide attempts, which led to numerous hospitalizations. Heidnik then established a church called Church of Heidnik as its ordained minister after establishing the United Church of the Ministers of God. The church received a $1,500 investment, which it turned into at least $500,000 in a Merrill Lynch account. He sold his home, bought a new 3-story home, rented out 2 of the floors, moved in with his mentally challenged girlfriend, Anjanette Davidson, and started living a prosperous life there in 1976. Later, he attacked a resident of the home. Heidnik and his girlfriend had their first child, a daughter, named Maxine, in 1978. Later, Gary kidnapped Maxine's sister, Alberta, who was also mentally disabled, from a Harrisburg institution. Later, when the women were discovered chained in his basement, he was detained and charged with aggravated assault, followed by numerous counts of kidnapping and rape. Gary was sentenced to 3 to 7 years in prison for the other charges, even though the aggravated assault charges were dropped. He was eventually freed in April of 1983. Gary Heidnik bought his third home, started marketing his church, and got married to Betty Disto, a mail-order bride from the Philippines, the following year. That marriage did not last, because Disto learned that Heidnik had relationships with 3 other women and then made his wife watch him have sex with other women. Gary was unaware that Betty had given birth to his son, Jesse John Disto, after the divorce until his ex-wife requested child support. Heidnik actually had 2 more kids with 2 different women, each of whom complained that he had inappropriate sexual behavior and propensity for locking them up, but those inclinations were about to sink to new depths. Gary started his string of kidnappings and rapes in 1986 with the intention of having sex slaves and setting up a harem. A part-time African-American prostitute named Josefina Rivera was picked up by Heidnik on November 25th and brought to his home. He chained her up in the basement after having sex with her and choked her until she passed out. When Rivera attempted to escape, or what Gary called misbehave, he dug a pit in the basement floor and covered it with a weighted board. Gary kidnapped mentally handicapped Sandra Lindsay on December 3rd, 1986. He had previously gotten her pregnant, but she had an abortion, which made him mad. The 2 women were repeatedly raped, while Gary kept them half naked and fed them infrequently. He invited Lisa Thomas, then 19 years old, to his house on December 23rd. She was placed in the basement with the other women after he spiked her alcohol. On January 2nd, 1987, a week later, Heidnik kidnapped Deborah Dudley. She attempted to fight off Gary during her captivity, but was more frequently beaten and thrown into the pit with the others. Following Dudley's kidnapping, Gary further humiliated the 4 women by making them engage in sexual activity with one another and force-feeding them dog food. He abducted Jacqueline Askins on January 18th. The mentally handicapped Sandra Lindsay was punished by being hanged by one wrist from a roof beam for 2 days on February 7th after Gary became irate with her for some unknown reason. The next morning, she died. He then carried her corpse upstairs, using a power saw, cut it into pieces, and put her head in a pot and removed the flesh. He fed his 2 dogs some of her parts and gave his captives the rest. A few days later, the police were called after nearby residents complained of a terrible smell. Gary was questioned, but explained the smell by saying that he had burned his food. A paranoid Gary Heidnik then offered his prisoners money to spy on one another. He was informed by Josefina Rivera that the others intended to attack him and flee. He pierced their eardrums with screwdrivers, rendering them deaf as a result. With the exception of Rivera, Heidnik then began electrocuting all of his prisoners. Rivera then began to assist Heidnik in torturing the others. She also had further privileges after allegedly winning his favor, such as being occasionally let to watch movies upstairs or be raped in a more comfortable setting. Rivera joined Heidnik's side and he elevated her to the position of leader of the other women, which he was doing to set the women up against each other. He promised to bring her hot chocolate and hot dogs and let her sleep outside the hole if she followed his instructions. But Gary was very clear. She would lose all of her privileges if she ever disobeyed him. Gary would put the women on punishment, starving, beating, and torturing them if they had offended him. To further torture them, he would occasionally tape their mouths shut and slowly insert a screwdriver into their ears. Gary eventually took Deborah Dudley to the cellar, dumped her in a hole filled with water, and shocked her to death on March 19, 1987, as a result of her resistance. After disposing of her body, he and Rivera together kidnapped Agnes Adams to take Dudley's place. On March 24, 1987, Rivera requested permission from Heidnik to travel to see her family. He probably said yes because he believed that she had Stockholm Syndrome and would not report it to the authorities. However, after Rivera contacted 911 and returned home to tell her boyfriend, Vincent Nelson, what happened, Gary was taken into custody. He made his initial court appearance in June 1988. Gary's laughable defense was that the victim of the kidnappings had been in the basement when he first moved into the house, like some old furniture that he decided to keep. He attempted to argue that he was legally insane, but this was refuted by the fact that he had made $500,000 on the stock market. Gary was given the death penalty on June 1st after being found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of kidnapping, 6 counts of rape, 4 counts of violent assault, and 1 count of involuntary deviant sexual interaction. He made an attempt at suicide by overdosing on Thorazine on December 31st while he was still on death row, but he only briefly went into a coma. Heidnik was supposed to be put to death by lethal injection at Rockview State Prison on April 15, 1997, but a last-minute appeal was made, which prompted a hearing to determine his competency. The death sentence was upheld by the state Supreme Court on June 25, 1999. Heidnik, 55 years old, was put to death by lethal injection on July 6th.